So you are getting into one of my favorite topics, which is altered states of consciousness. Now, what we have to remember is that when we're talking about this in like the psychology clinical space, we're going to get kind of a standard spiel if the person is trauma informed. You're going to say, hey, dissociation is very functional. It is very functional. It's not a bad thing. It's just that your brain is really good at adapting to extreme events, right? When we are in a extremely hard, adverse, traumatic event, our brains are going to protect us in whatever way possible they have. And they're really good at kind of overclocking themselves to adjust and keep you alive in this extreme event or events, right? Especially if you grew up in a toxic home. Then when you get out of that situation, these functional adaptations are no longer functional. They have, it's bringing anti-tank weaponry to a gunfight, right? It is a difference in caliber where you are literally just overblowing your cognitive response to standard life stresses, which is okay. Like, it's just an understanding that now this is not needed, so we have to work to recalibrate those responses by increasing, stress tolerance, by working through traumatic memory, by doing embodied somatic things to help the system begin to regulate at a more typical pathway. And that's totally okay. But a lot of people who are part of the mental health field will not talk about dissociation in any way other than as a pathology. They will talk about it as something that is functional, but they won't really look at it outside of the pathology. So when I talk about dissociation, I'm still keeping that mostly in that area. I will switch out to altered states of consciousness, which are inherently dissociative. A lot of the terminology around this in the more positive seeking sense is given a lot of different names. Some people will call it altered states of consciousness. Some people will call it getting, they're having an altered experience due to substances. Sometimes you get those unintentionally from medications you take. Sometimes you get them very intentionally from medications you take. There are people who have flow states, which are considered a cognitively positive event where you have passion and skill and working with a particular medium. So like if you're a musician and you hit a flow state and you can just do it, right? Or you're in a presentation, if you're a good speaker or preacher, I can tell you a lot of preaching for me is exceedingly dissociative in a positive way. For me, I very often can practice and do the things as I've written something. I can preach, and in the moment, I don't remember doing it. It is very rare that I have a very first person perspective when I'm preaching, because I've done the writing, I've done the thinking about it, and to actually do it well, I'm not really there in that moment. And it comes across better when I'm not, because if I'm there too much, I overthink it and I end up messing up that flow state. So a lot of times in that preaching for me, or public speaking, or doing community organizing, I can step into a place where I am like on, right? A lot of people who do these kinds of things where they're good at something, they can move into the state of kind of being on. And as such, it is a very, very positive flow state, but it's also dissociative. It is not your normal state of being. You are in an altered state of consciousness, which is a dissociation from your standard baseline. Religion, since the beginning of humanity, spiritual practice and religion has included trance elements. Trances and engaging in any kind of trance induction, whether that be through rhythm or through pain or through singing or dancing or chanting or all of the other things, or ingesting substances to aid you in spiritual journeys, all of those things induce trance states and altered states of consciousness, which are a form of dissociation. And yet in this liminal space, many religions are constantly seeking that desire to feel that particular space, to get one into a particular space through specific forms of ritual. And that repetition can get you there. There's this thing about, the songs of a religion you grew up with, even if you've left that religion, that resonate inside of you because you have a certain level of consistent indoctrination to and enculturation to that particular faith. Even if you are no longer part of it, there are parts of you that have been, so accustomed to it that they hold an emotional value to you, even if you cognitively have left that context. And that's why a lot of us can still listen to old-timey Christian songs that are completely against what our theological viewpoint is for the world. Because for us, that is not about what it's actually saying, but what it is eliciting within us. Similarly, some people go and, you go to your EDM or techno kinds of concerts and use rhythm and beat and light and movement to create an altered state of consciousness. Going to the movie theater is an altered state of consciousness. Going to a theater in general. Suspending disbelief is a light form of dissociation. You are stepping outside of your normal state of consciousness. And a lot of people can have various forms of this, right? You can end up in daily life. There's a huge difference in ambiance. Therefore, there's a difference in internal experience of whether or not you're going to experience romantic feelings for somebody based on the kinds of environmental cues that you have. So, for example, yes, there's an aspect of like interpersonal compatibility, but if a date takes you on a date to McDonald's or some other fast food joint, that is going to have a different ambiance and vibe than them taking you to a very fine dinner and to listen to music or go to a movie, where there's another aspect and layered aspect of dissociation, of kind of moving into this altered state. And that ambiance can affect how you actually feel about that person and about the situation. So this is why so many people who are trying to like get a proposal, like a marriage proposal, they do this on a special weekend with all of this build up, because they're trying to create a cognitive crescendo of this, almost beautiful bubble of altered states of consciousness. Certain memories of like really exquisite moments in your life, very elevated, very high stimulation to your system, can be seen in this almost glass bubble of dissociation. Going on vacation for a lot of people is like that. You get there, it's almost unreal because it's so different from your original context that being on vacation allows for you to almost be a slightly different person. Hence the, what goes on in Vegas stays in Vegas, right? Those kinds of mentalities come from that sort of removal of the standard breaker points, where you decide in your normal life you have to have certain kinds of self-control, certain kinds of self-perspective, certain kinds of behavior. When you move to this state of being on vacation, lots of people start acting up really rough, because for them this is a ability to not have the same rules, and therefore they start doing different things. They start acting up. They start doing stuff. A lot of people have this in terms of their sexuality, their sexual interests, who they are when they're kind of on the level and what they want to promise their spouse, versus who they are when they get a little spun up, or when they go to conferences and there's a bunch of different new people who are all having drinks at the bar together, talking shop about their particular career. And they are all in close proximity to a bunch of bedrooms at this particular hotel for the conference. That leads to a lot of dissociated behavior, ones that a lot of people will engage with, right? So this kind of thing can be positive, it can be neutral, it can be negative, but dissociation from your standard is a part of the human experience. It is not always trauma, and it is often states that we actually are seeking out through religion, through substance use, through all sorts of ritual, through our own experiences of getting on a roller coaster and having an adrenaline flood, or going to a, scary movie, or a haunted maze or something like that, because we are constantly seeking various forms of stimulation and ways to get out of our own head to find liminal space in our world.